We are overrun with foreign steel, up to our ears in it. That would seem to be the point of a 25% tariff on all imported steel. We have too much of it. You'll hear these kind of statistics in support of that assertion, showing that U.S. imports have skyrocketed in recent years. In this, the second of our series on steel tariffs, we will focus on imports. If you saw our first video, you might remember that the star of that video was this graph, which shows that we can make 90% of the steel we made in 1960 using 15% of the people today, a 600% increase in productivity. For imports, let's start with this graph, which shows America's net import percentage for steel annually since 1980. This is imports minus exports as a percentage of consumption. First, note that it bounces around in a kind of cyclical fashion, which means that just because the number moves in one direction for a few years doesn't mean it's a long-term trend. Now, this line is based on the 10-year rolling average, a common technique used to smooth out the swings in a cyclical graph. You can see that for the last 40 years, the rate has stayed pretty much between 15 and 20%. You can also see that while imports are on upswing recently, they're still within the typical range of the last 40 years. Note that 20% or even 25 or 30% is not that high. Keep in mind, there are industries where the U.S. regularly imports well over 50% of the product. So right off the bat, it is hard to look at these numbers and think there has been a huge deluge of imports. Now let's drill down a bit further. This is a list of the U.S.'s top 10 steel supplier countries, which together account for about 80% of America's steel imports. We're using 2007 as a base year. It summarizes key information relative to steel for each country. 7 of the countries stand out because they don't stand out. None of them have a significant increase in overall exports, which you would expect to see if a country was deliberately and perhaps unfairly trying to boost exports. And only one of these 7, Turkey, has increased production significantly. But Turkey is also consuming most of that steel, so exports haven't increased much. South Korea and Brazil are different in that both have significant increases in exports. Korea via an increase in production and Brazil via an increase in imports. But we have to put the impact in perspective. The amount these two increase their exports to the U.S. comes to only 5% of U.S. consumption. Not a huge proportion. And we know that 5% increase didn't push the U.S. far out of its historical pattern. It's hard to see these numbers as representing a flood of imported steel. If this video has been confusing or boring, allow us to offer this explanation. First, this is a statistical analysis, not any of life's more adventurous or fun activities. We're doing what we can. Secondly, there's no pattern, no smoking gun. This is a smoking gun, a 600% increase in productivity. That's a smoking gun. Imports don't seem to have had that obvious of an impact on the steel industry. Now, the astute viewer will notice this video has ignored the proverbial elephant in the room, the country everyone cites as the number one problem in the steel industry, China. China is so big we're giving it its own video, our next one. And again, you might find the statistics to be surprising.